I was diagnosed with OCD 3 years ago, but let me take you on my journey before I was diagnosed. I grew up with a father who was on drugs and alcohol most of my life. My father knew some of my friends' parents, so they would tell me, "Oh, I saw your dad this weekend." And I automatically knew what that meant when they said, "Oh, I saw your dad this weekend." That meant that they saw him getting high, using drugs, or drunk. And in some cases, I thought they saw my dad more than I saw my dad because their parents knew my dad. So my dad would go to their house and drink and do drugs or whatever it is that he was doing. And so a lot of cases I thought, wow, like they know my dad, they see my dad more than I see my dad. And there were a lot of times, y'all, that I wish that I was like, wow, like I wish that my dad lived in another state because I think it would have been more palatable, I guess, that he was on drugs and alcohol. But the fact that we lived in the same state and I didn't get a chance to see him, I think that impacted me even the more. So as a result of my dad not being there, he broke a lot of promises like a lot of dads do. And he would only come around when he was drunk and or high or whatever. And so that was his time to say he was sorry. So he would come over in the wee hours of the night sometimes, or maybe not in the wee hours of the night. Maybe he would just come over and he was drunk or high. And he would say he was sorry. And so, you know, my younger self would be forgiving because I didn't know any other thing to do but to forgive him and say, okay, it's okay, Dad, it's okay. But I was definitely that little girl that was waiting in the window when he would promise that he was going to take me different places. And so that caused me to have trust and abandonment issues. I absolutely, like any little girl, hated that my dad wasn't around for anything important in my life. You know, like I said before, he would say he was going to show up and he never would. I remember like he wasn't at my high school graduation. Even though we told him about it, we told him we had a ticket for him, he didn't show up. I got married in 1998 and I ended up walking myself down the aisle. And as crazy as that seems, it was probably one of the most powerful moments in my life because I've always been raised as a Christian, and I've always been raised to believe in God or believe in a higher power. And so I've always been raised to believe in a higher power, to believe in God, right? And I saw, I even though I walked down the aisle by myself, I felt like God, like in a way, like took my hand and walked me down the aisle, if that makes sense. And so it was a very powerful moment, but it was also a sad moment because my dad didn't walk me down the aisle, you know, because he was nowhere to be found. I would give my dad chance after chance to do right, but he just could not get himself together. And I always forgave him, but I was angry at him on the inside because I interpreted his absence as there must be something wrong with me. There must be something that I've done to make him not show up for me. And so then I went to therapy. And the therapist that I went to at the time, she told me, she said, I want you to pretend that your dad is sitting in this chair right here. And I want you to tell your dad everything that you want him to know. And so at first, y'all, I looked at her like, seriously, are you serious? That's what you want me to do? And I was uncomfortable initially But as she turned that chair towards me, and then I sat in the chair facing the empty chair, I basically cursed my dad out in that entire session and told him basically how he wasn't there for me when I was molested. I was molested at a young age, and I told him, you weren't there for me. You didn't protect me from this predator. You weren't there to protect me. I told him that you weren't there when I was in high school and my boyfriend pulled out a 9mm gun and pointed it to my head and told me that because I wanted to break up with him, he said I couldn't break up with him, and that if he couldn't have me, nobody could. And he basically said that I will kill you, and then after I kill you, I will kill myself. And so I was yelling and screaming at the chair, and I was saying all of these things. He wasn't, telling him like, you weren't there when I experienced all of this trauma because you were selfish. You were selfish and you were only thinking about yourself. And at the end of the session, my therapist said, okay, now I want you to schedule a time to talk to your dad on the phone or in person and let him all know all of the things that you shared today. I was looking at her like, are you serious? Like, for real? I thought this was just an exercise for, our therapy session. So I finally caught up with my dad and I told him all of the things that I just told you. And, that I had shared in my therapy session. And I told him, I said, I release you. And I would no longer allow you to weigh me down. I'm taking off this backpack that's been so heavy, this backpack that has shame in it, this backpack that has mistrust in it, this backpack, that has, all of these expectations of you. I'm taking it off today. And then he told me in that conversation that he too was molested when he was younger, growing up, by a family friend. Or it was either a family friend or a family member. I can't remember what he told me. But he said that he didn't have a relationship with his father because his father wasn't there for he and my uncle. And to be honest with you, I was shocked when he said that about my grandfather. I had to pause for a minute, and I was shocked because the father that he was describing was my grandfather, obviously, but that grandfather showed up for me like none other. He showed up as an awesome man in me and my brother's life. And my grandfather, he called us every day. He came to get us from school sometimes, just to pick us up, just to, take us out. Or once a week, he would take us out to dinner. And then on the weekends, we would stay with him, or he would come pick us up and we would hang out with him on the weekends. So the father that my dad was describing was not the same grandfather that he was to me. And so, that was shocking to me. And then I had another session with my therapist, and she wanted me to recap the conversation and tell her how the conversation went with my dad. So I recapped the conversation for her. And she looked at me and she said, Kimberly, what would happen if you saw your father as human and realize that he couldn't give you all of those things because he didn't have the tools to. And so, of course, when she first said it, like, I rolled my eyes. I was like, okay, whatever. But then I realized, like, no, like what she's saying, it has like some validity to it. His father wasn't there for him. And so how could I expect him to be there for me? Like, because he didn't have the tools in his toolbox. And so basically I stopped having these expectations of my dad moving forward. And I told myself, you know what? Like, you're going to just accept him for who he is in the moments that you have with him. And so I had to mourn. I literally went through a time of mourning. Like, I had to mourn that loss of a living parent. You know, I'm mourning because he was alive, he was well, but drugs and alcohol had consumed his life. And that was his way. What I had to recognize was that doing drugs and alcohol, smoking weed and all of that, that was his way of numbing his pain. That was his way of coping and getting through life. And so what I told myself is that, I would no longer have these like super duper big expectations of him. I would just basically, just enjoy the time that we have and don't expect anything more. So fast forward, I was a part of a church from around 14. I started going to this church at around 14 or 15 until I got married. I love this church because I felt like my life was attached to something with purpose. My mother attended this church. My close friends attended this church. We were just like one big happy family, right? All of the pastors in the church knew my story about my dad and how my dad was on drugs and alcohol and how he wasn't there. And one of the pastors gave me a covenant ring, and he told me not to take the ring off until I got married. And that meant so much to me, y'all, because he was literally the dad that I always wanted. So when he placed this ring on my finger, I felt valued. I felt important, And so he and a few other pastors, they would like take me on dates to nice restaurants and tell me this is how your husband should treat you and this is how a man should treat you. And I felt like $1,000,000 because I had men in my life who finally saw me. Like, I didn't feel like my dad. I didn't feel seen by my dad. But with these pastors, I felt like, wow, like I have men in my life who finally see Kimberly. And so that pastor that gave me the covenant ring, he and his wife asked me to move in with them after I graduated from high school. And I did. And they also, convinced me not to go to college because they said, you know what, college isn't for everyone. And so I think you should, just go into full-time ministry with us now that you've graduated, go into full-time ministry with us. And, that your path is just different. So I was like, okay. And I was young, I was impressionable. And I thought that I was doing something that God wanted me to do at the time. Like, I thought I was pleasing God at the time. So anyway, I moved in with them. And it was a bit weird, that I moved in with them because my mom lived in the same city. And I was literally living with my mom before I moved in with them, in their house. But at the time, the pastor's wife, she was pregnant and she had a little girl. And I basically helped raise her daughter. And then eventually she had a son. And I basically helped her raise both of her kids. And when I say I helped her raise both of her kids, like I gave them baths, I did homework with them, I took them to and from school, took them to different events. Excuse me. I took them on field trips. I ironed their clothes, washed and folded their clothes. I washed and folded her and her husband's clothes. I was basically like a live-in nanny, to be honest with you. And this church had a lot of rules. What I call it is the bubble, right? Like, you are inside of this bubble and you're kind of isolated from the rest of the world. And so this church had a lot of rules like You shouldn't date unless it's with the intention to marry. And if you do date, then you and the person that you're dating, then you have to go on a group date. Like you have to go on a date with the group. Because, you know, if you go on that date by yourself, then that means y'all probably gonna be having sex, lots of sex, and that's not of God, you know. And so the other thing that they would tell us is that like if you were horny, like and you were like, you know, Pastor so and so, like I've been having thoughts about, you know, having sex and, you know, wanting to masturbate or whatever, then they would say, okay, you know what I want you to do? I want you to go in the bathroom when you get home and I want you to take a cold shower. As if that shower was going to take those feelings away. But that is what they would tell us, like, go and take a cold shower. And we were a strong community and we were basically clicked up, you know, with our church crew and isolated from our families, our coworkers, our friends. And to be honest with you, we were made to feel bad if we spent time away from church. Like, for example, I remember my husband went to visit his mom. Like everybody else in ministry, they had gone, you know, to visit their parents or gone on vacation. And the pastor, his wife had left too. She had went to visit her parents and he was still home by himself. And my husband left their house to go see his mom because he hadn't seen his mom in a while. And so that night he drove, you know, a few hours, more than a few hours, but anyway, he drove to go see his mother. And when he got to his mother's house later that night, the pastor called and said, hey, I have a dentist appointment in the morning and I have nobody else here who can take me. Can you take me? And my husband took him. My husband told his mom, like, oh, I gotta go. Like, you know, in a couple of hours, I need to get back on the road so that I can go and take him to the dentist. And his mom was like, nobody else can take him? Like, he can't take himself? Like, what? And so she was, of course, annoyed and devastated. But my husband felt bad. He felt bad, like, you know, I am serving, you know, this man of God, and this comes before family. This comes before anybody, because me serving this man of God means that I'm serving God, you know? And so, so anyway, I met my husband in the ministry and we never dated, y'all. Is that crazy or what? We never dated. But, you know, we never dated. My husband proposed to me and we got married like a year later. It was so awkward because even though my husband and I, we were best friends before we got married. But we really didn't get to know each other until after we got married because we never dated. So, you know, we got to learn like all of these, you know, things that you would normally learn through dating. We didn't learn it until we were married, until we were into our marriage, you know. And we've been married for 27 years now, and we always say that we are a miracle. Like, it's a miracle that we are still married, because a lot of the people who went to that church, they're like now divorced because, you know, because they went through what we went through. Like, they didn't date. And to be honest with you, a lot of the marriages were arranged. And what I mean by that is that, like, the pastor's wife, she would say, ooh, so-and-so and so-and-so, like, I think you guys would be, you know, would make a good couple. And then that's how we got together, you know. And my husband and I were no different. We were, you know, she said that she thought that we would be a great couple, and that's how it ended up, you know. And so during my time at the church, I experienced 5 or 6 miscarriages. I can't remember. It was either 5 or 6. And I was devastated, y'all. I was devastated. I got laid off after one of my miscarriages. And I remember during the time that I was laid off, I had developed a strong paranoia that my husband was cheating on me. And I remember, remember, like I had told you that I had already dealt with trust and abandonment for my dad. So I started checking my husband's phone day and night, y'all, like nonstop. Like it was like these urges were coming to me, and I would just check his phone. When he went to sleep, I would get up and I would check his phone. Before he went to work in the morning, I would get up, I would check his phone. In the middle of the day, I would check his phone. And also we couldn't go anywhere. Like we couldn't go on, dates or anything like that. Because we couldn't go dates or anything like that because because I would think that he was cheating on me. And so, and what I mean by that is like, I would, if we were, let's say we were at, a restaurant, then I would say, I saw you looking at that woman. Like, you want her? You want to be with her? I would say things like that, right? And he would just look at me and say, what? And so then he would be like, let's go home. And so I remember that I thought that he liked this girl at his job. And she was substituting at the time. He's an educator, so he's a teacher, and she was substitute for his class. And so I Googled this girl because back then, we had cell phones back then, but anyway, I Googled her and I found out where she lived. And I got inside of her gated community, y'all, her gated apartment community. And I sat at her house in her parking lot, like waiting to see if she or my husband would walk out. And I remember doing it for 3 days straight, y'all, just nonstop. Like I would sit in her parking lot for hours, like just waiting, like thinking like I know my husband's gonna come out, or I know my husband's gonna pull up with her. And he would never pull up with her. Like she would just go in her apartment by herself. And so I remember on the third day, and there was nothing to see, because she was going in and out of her apartment by herself. I remember on the third day thinking to myself, like, Kim, like, this is not normal. This is not normal. Like, you've been doing this for 3 days and this is not normal. And so, basically I went to my husband's school, like after the third day, maybe on the fourth day, because in my head, I'm thinking that this scenario is true, right? I'm thinking that like, he likes this girl, he's cheating on me with her. So I'm thinking, I'm following the lie, And so I went to my husband's school and I left a note on the stairs that I knew that he came down every day when it was time for him to leave to go home. And so I honestly to be honest with you, I can't remember like what the note said. But it was basically accusing him of sleeping with this girl. But I didn't make the note for me. I didn't say it was from me, obviously. I made it look like it was from somebody else. So I picked my husband up that day like I normally did because I was laid off. Remember I told you, I was laid off after I had my miscarriages and all of that. So I picked him up from work. I saw him come down those steps. I saw him pick up the note because I put his name on the note. I saw him pick up the note and he read it on the way to the car. He told me about the note when he got in the car. And then he called his principal, y'all, and told her what happened and asked if she could look at the cameras, y'all, to see who put the note there. And she said, yes, like, give me a minute and I'll call you back. I wanted to throw up in my mouth. I wanted to throw up in my mouth. I wanted to pee on myself. I was like, oh shit. Oh my God. And so I knew that I had been caught. Like, I knew I had been caught. And it was nowhere around it. I felt so much anxiety, so much shame, so much guilt, anger, frustration. The call came and his principal told him, Dedrick, it was Kim that put the note there. And my husband was so devastated and so hurt that that it was me, you know. And then I was like, well, you know what? I need to come on and I need to just be honest. So I revealed to him that, like, I had been stalking this girl at her gated community for like 3 days. And I just came clean, and he was hurt. And he told me that what hurt him the most was that he had never cheated on me, that he was being accused of something that he hadn't even done. And he was like, and that is hurtful to me, you know, that you would go through that length of, you know, doing all of that. And I haven't even cheated on you, you know? And, so I wanted to go back to the miscarriages. I wanted to elaborate on the miscarriages a little bit. So the doctors initially told me that I could not have kids because I had something called PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome. And so I was like, okay, they were like, you know, if you have kids, because you have PCOS, you're going to need help. I was like, okay, cool. Cool. Then after having my second miscarriage, the doctors were like, oh, it's not that you can't have children, it's that you can't carry them full term. So again, you'll need help. So I was like, okay, but I'm thinking to myself, y'all really don't know what's wrong with me and why I keep having these miscarriages, do you? So anyway, during my 5th or 6th miscarriage, I was so fed up with the doctors. I was fed up with life. I was fed up with God, y'all. And like, God is like my dog. Like, I love God. Like, he is the center of, he is the foundation, my foundation, you know. And so, but I was livid with God because I was like, you are playing like a sick joke on me. And so I got in my car and I went to, I drove and drove until I got to Marshall's. It was a Marshall's. And I parked in the Marshall's parking lot, like way in the back of the parking lot. And I sat there and I said, God, like, I can't remember, like I said, if it was my 5th or 6th miscarriage. I was like, I'm on my 5th or 6th miscarriage. And this is not funny. Like, I feel like you are playing a sick joke on me. Like, I'm kind. I show up in the world kind. I lead with love. You know, like I, you know, give to the poor. You know, I'm a good daughter, I'm a good sister, I'm a good wife. Well, maybe not such a good wife, you know, at the time, but, you know, like, why can't I have a child? Like, this is how I thought it was supposed to go. You get married, you have kids, and that's, you know, you get a dog, and that's how it goes. And so I just wept and wept and wept and wept and wept in a car, y'all. And I was bawling to the point where when I looked up in the mirror, like, my eyes were like puffy and red, and it was just bad. And so I told God, I said, fine, today, on this day, I'm telling you that I, Kimberly Nichelle Womble, that I released the idea of having a baby. Like, after today, I'm not going to try for a baby. I'm not going to talk about a baby. I accept that a baby is not in the cards for me. And little did I know at that time, I was pregnant with my daughter. who is now 13. But I wanted to give you guys kind of like a backdrop, like more information on the miscarriages. But anyway, so, you know, I felt bad after my husband, you know, told me that, like, I can't believe you went to this great length, you know, these great lengths and put this note on this, you know, at this door and, you know, on these steps or whatever. He was just so devastated that I had did that. And so I felt like a loser, y'all. Like I bawled because I knew that I was spiraling. I knew I was spiraling, and I cried all day. I was like bowled over, like in a fetus position, like a baby, and I cried for hours. I was crying for hours. And when I say crying for hours, it wasn't like it was like this gut wrenching cry, like for hours. And I, you know, like I said, I had just experienced like my fifth or sixth or fourth or fifth miscarriage. I can't remember. Honestly, I can't. And so, you know, I was laid off and I didn't even recognize myself. I couldn't even recognize myself. I didn't know how I had gotten into such a dark place, y'all. Like I was so lost. And the next day, my husband went to work and I was home alone because, you know, I was laid off and I didn't have a job. So I got a Ziploc bag and went to the medicine cabinet in our bathroom and I emptied all of the pill bottles into the Ziploc bag. And I sat on the floor and I began to take some of the pills. And I just kept taking the pills slowly. I was taking them slowly. I wasn't taking them like all at once. I was just, taking them slowly. And I will never, never forget this. My mother kept calling my phone and I kept sending her the voicemail. And then she finally left me a message after I sent her the voicemail like 4 times. And her message went something like this. Hello, my beautiful daughter. And then she sang that part, like she's always singing on my voice messages, or when she calls me, she's always singing. So she sung that part, right? And then she told me that she loved me. And, she talked about how proud she was to be my mother and how proud of me she was. And then she thanked God for a daughter like me. And she said, and I don't know what I would do if you weren't in my life. She said, okay, bye. Call me back. I love you, sweetie. And it was in that moment where I was mad at God, because I was like, I know you did that on purpose. I know you made her call me on purpose as I'm taking these pills, but I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to call her back. I'm going to end this. I am going to end this. Like, I can't take this anymore. Like, I can't take it. And it was so crazy that in the moment I was trying to end my life, God had my mom to call and leave me that message. And after I listened to her message, I just began to cry and cry with the Ziploc bag, filled with the pills and in my hand. And I heard the key turn and I knew it was my husband. And I was thinking to myself, what is he doing home so early? And he was like, hey, babe, I made it home early today. And so I had no time to do away with the pills. And he walked in and saw me because I was bawling. My eyes were puffy. I was on the floor. My hair was all over my head. Like, I know that sounds crazy or cliche, but it is the God knows truth. Like, I hadn't brushed my teeth that day. Like, it was crazy. And so he immediately knew what was happening. And he got down on the floor and he held me and we cried, and he held me all night long. We stayed on that floor all night long and he held me and he just kept saying, babe, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. I'm sorry, I'm getting choked up. And he was like, because I can't live without you. I need you. I need you. I need you alive. He was like, you can't do that. You can't do that. And he hugged me and he was like, it's going to be okay. Like, we're going to make it through this. And, tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what you're experiencing. And I started telling him, that like all of this stuff is happening to me all at once. And I can't find my way. I can't, it's like so dark. Like, I can't make my way out of this darkness, And so he was like, we got each other. We got this. You gonna make it through, And so we were just both sobbing uncontrollably. And I told him, like, I just didn't feel like myself, and I didn't know how I was going to get out of that place, So fast forward, I finally have my beautiful daughter. And after I had her, I noticed that I felt sad all the time. I never had thoughts of like harming her or anything, but I noticed after I had her, I always felt sad and depressed. And I didn't know much about mental health at that time, but I am 100% sure, hindsight is 2020, right? Like, I'm 100% sure I was dealing with postpartum depression. The thoughts to check my husband's phone returned, after I had her, and, and I was feeling sad and depressed during that time. The thoughts to check his phone returned again. We could never go out on dates because they would all be ruined because I would think he was looking at, or wanted another woman. So we were isolated from going on dates. And so we pretty much would stay inside the house. He would just go to work and come home, and we would just stay inside the house because my anxiety was at an all-time high. And to be honest with you, I didn't even know, it was called anxiety at that time. I didn't really know what anxiety was at that time, but I knew that it was something that was running rampant in my life. Like, I knew that it was something that, when these thoughts would come and all of that, like, I knew that it was something. I just didn't know that it was called anxiety. And then we moved to Kuwait for 9 years. And during our time in Kuwait, I dealt with anxiety and, again, my trust and my abandonment issues. I always thought my husband was going to leave me for another woman. So I would literally do things to push him away because I didn't want to be blindsided. I wanted to get him before he got me. I didn't want to get God. But, all of this, like, is me just trying to control this narrative, right? So the same cycle that was happening in the States started happening again in Kuwait, but where, I was looking for his phone, but then I took it to another level. I hacked into his phone where I could load all of his text messages on my laptop. And so I was able to see all of his text messages real time. Whatever he did on his phone, I could see it. And I could track him. I could take pictures of where he was. It was insane. I hacked his emails, and he found out about it. And he found out about it because one day we were talking, and I couldn't keep it in, and so I was like, yeah, like I can't remember. I asked him some scenario, but whatever it was, I wouldn't have known that had I not seen his text messages. And so he was like, do you have access to my text messages? And so, so he was, again, hurt and devastated. And he told me that he felt betrayed. And he was like, this is like the ultimate betrayal to me. He was like, and again, like, I'm a good dude. Like, I haven't even done any of these accusations that you are putting against me, And so by this time, the anxiety and a paranoia was keeping me up all night. Now, if that wasn't happening when we were in the States, but by this time, the anxiety and a paranoia was keeping me up all night long. And so I would wake my husband up in the middle of the night every day asking him, are you cheating on me? And, telling him, that I keep getting these thoughts that, that won't go away. I keep getting these thoughts that he's going to leave me. I keep getting these thoughts that he has sex with this person, or that he kissed this person, or that he wanted to be with this person. And it's interesting because during that time, I talked to a lot of talk therapists via video when I was in Kuwait, but it didn't seem to help, And so, okay, so during the pandemic, I told my husband that I wasn't feeling like myself. And he and I were watching a Oprah Winfrey documentary with Prince Harry. And Prince Harry started talking about how he was taking ERP therapy and how he dealt with anxiety. And after that, I kind of identified with him. I was like, oh, that's what that's called, that I've been going through. And so during the pandemic, I told my husband, I wasn't feeling like myself. I got a call from my father that he had cancer. He was in the States, I was in Kuwait. And so, and that they were only giving him a certain amount of time to live. And I wanted to desperately go and be with him so he wouldn't be alone. But guess what? The airport in Kuwait was closed. So flights weren't coming in and flights weren't going out. And so they had just basically shut down the airport. And I was devastated and I started spiraling again. And during the pandemic in Kuwait, we could only go outside for like an hour in the evening. And when we went outside for an hour in the evening, it had to be around our house. Like we couldn't go outside, we couldn't drive anywhere. But anyway, so now I'm in a pandemic in a foreign country, can't get to my dad, dealing with a father who's terminally ill, and my mental health is taking a huge toll. I videoed with my dad and his doctors daily, and they gave me updates. And then the day after my father died, the airports in Kuwait opened up, and me, my husband, and my daughter got on the first flight out. And I was so hurt that I didn't get to see my dad before he died, because he basically died alone in the hospital, because in the States, they weren't letting people visit you if you had to go in the hospital during COVID. So that made me really sad. But anyway, we went back to the States. My husband recommended that I see a psychiatrist because he started connecting the dots after all of these years and started reading and looking at shows on mental health and knew something was wrong with me, but he didn't know how to put a name to it. I was paranoid and, had tons of anxiety, and he suggested I see a psychiatrist because, but I thought that him wanting me to see a psychiatrist because he was trying to leave me and he wanted to get, me to get a diagnosis about being crazy. And he wanted me to be like admitted to a hospital or something, so that he could move on and have custody of my daughter. This is all of the thoughts that were coming to my head. So I fought and I didn't go to the psychiatrist until he went back to Kuwait. And my daughter and I stayed in the States. I homeschooled her. And I told him, if we were going to work, that we needed to go to couples therapy. I saw a couple of psychiatrists once or twice, but I didn't see them long enough to get diagnosed, because I didn't want to lose custody of my daughter, or at least that's where my mind was thinking. Like, if they diagnose me, I'm going to lose custody of my daughter, and no one knew what I was going through because I was still functioning as normal. But there was chaos going on the inside, even though people couldn't tell on the outside. So fast forward, we decided as a family that we wouldn't, that my husband would finish his contract in Kuwait and that we would, basically, move back to the States after my dad's death so that we could be closer to family, right? And so my husband encouraged me to see a psychiatrist because he didn't want to lose me. He was like, we are in a dark place in our marriage and we were definitely headed for divorce. And so he got home from Kuwait for good. And we basically didn't like each other, y'all. We were like so exhausted and fed up with each other, both of us. And so we were so done with each other. The anxiety, the paranoia, the trust, the uncontrollable thoughts about him cheating, all of that had taken its toll on me. And I talked to a lawyer behind my husband's back because, I was like, okay, I think he's trying to take my daughter away from me. And he said something that calmed me down. And he said, listen, we're in a pandemic. Like, these judges know that like everybody's mental health is on the line because we are in a pandemic. He was like, he said, if you go to a psychiatrist and you take the medicine and you do what they tell you to do, you're good. Like, you're not going to get your daughter taken away from you. Do you know how many people who have custody of their kids who have mental health issues? And so I was like, oh, okay. So then fast forward, when my husband got home from Kuwait for good, I saw the psychiatrist. I felt safe with this particular psychiatrist. He asked me so many questions. And then at the end, he said, Kimberly, you have OCD. And he prescribed 2 medications for me. And I felt a huge sigh of relief, y'all. When he put a name to what I had been going through all of these years, I wasn't crazy. I just had OCD, and in a strange way, I felt a release because fear made me feel like isolation was the only way to prevent others from judging me. And I no longer had to be ashamed of the intrusive thoughts, and that the shame over these unwanted thoughts prevented me from opening up to others. OCD ruined a lot of my relationships because my intrusive thoughts and the paranoia always had me thinking people were after me. And I was always asking for assurance in those friendships, making sure things were good. Are we good? Making sure things were good in the friendship. And it caused a strain in the relationship. And it caused my friends to be exhausted because I always needed validation. And so I lost a lot of good friends, when I was in Kuwait. And I lost some when I got back to the States as well because of that particular reason. My first symptoms of OCD, or how OCD showed up in my life, was the intrusive thoughts, the compulsive behaviors, the need for validation in friendships, checking to make sure the door was locked before going to bed because I was afraid somebody would break in. Checking the stove. That was another one. Always checking the stove to make sure I turned it off. Not wanting to put my purse on the floor. Like if I went to restaurants, I had to put my purse like on the chair. I didn't want to put my purse on the floor because that was just gross and nasty. Not wanting to use public bathrooms because I just thought it was gross and nasty. Washing my hands excessively. Not eating or drinking after people because I didn't want backwash, or I just thought it was dirty. Sleeping, I know this is going to sound weird, but sleeping on the side of the bed farthest from the bedroom door. Or like if I stayed in a hotel, sleeping on the side of the bed that was farthest from the hotel door, because in my head, I thought if somebody broke in, I would be able to do something and see them first. And again, OCD likes control. So I wanted to sleep on that side of the bed so that I could, in my head, like control the outcome, right? And to be honest, like I still, deal with some of those today. And I'm working with my therapist, just one step at a time to try to overcome them. So like, for example, like with me not wanting to like go to public bathrooms, right? Like the first step my therapist said was like, okay, you don't have to go in there and use the bathroom, but just step inside of the bathroom. Step in and then walk out. So that's what I've been doing lately, like stepping in and walking out, So, taking little strides. I take Lexapro and Abilify. I was actually diagnosed with OCD. I was diagnosed with OCD and depression. So I take Lexapro and Abilify. And when I tell you, when I first started taking the meds, I was afraid. when the doctor told me, you know, about the meds. And then, you know, when you get the meds and you go to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist, you know, they have to tell you by law, like, okay, these are the side effects of these medicines or whatever. And so they were telling me all of these side effects. And then, Lord, I went on Reddit. And why did I do that? I went on Reddit and people were saying like, you know, oh, like, you know, my eye was twitching and it won't stop twitching. Or, oh, this leg stopped moving. And it was just crazy stuff like that they were saying about the medicine, right? And so, literally, like I got the medicine, and I want to say, that I kept it for like almost a month before I took it. Like I just, you know, in my head, I was like, okay, I've taken one step. I went to the psychiatrist. Well, I've taken a couple of steps. I went to the psychiatrist that I was always afraid to go to. I felt safe with him. I told him all of my business. And, you know, and now, like, you know, I'm going to get this medicine that I never wanted, right? And so it was after a month. And so my husband, you know, he would gently, you know, nudge me, and he would say, listen, like, you gotta you gotta try it. Like, he was like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, if something happened and you get a side effect, then you just stop taking it, and then you go back. And he was like, you do know that people go through this all the time, right? Like, you know, he was like, you know, they go and they get medicine, and if it doesn't work, it may take a few times to get the doses, you know, to get the correct doses for your body. He was like, but that's okay. And so, of course, like, you know, when I was seeing a regular talk therapist, one thing that she had said to me was, you know, what's the worst that could happen if your husband leaves? If your husband leaves you, what's the worst that could happen? And so that question always like resonated and stayed with me. So in that moment when my husband was telling me, just, you know, I'm right here, take the medicine in front of me. And he was holding my hand. He got me water. I took the medicine, and he was like, what's the worst that could happen, babe? Like, what's the worst that could happen? And I was like, you know what? You're right. I'm going to take it, you know? But, you know, like I said, I had heard so many horror stories on TV and, you know, on Reddit, you know, about, you know, different stuff happening to different people. But let me tell you, when I started taking that medicine, I was no longer waking up in the middle of the night. And when I say I was waking up in the middle of the night, y'all, when I was in Kuwait, I was waking up in the middle of the night, honey. Like I did not, you know, like I couldn't sleep. Like a part of like the paranoia and all of that heightened because I wasn't getting the proper amount of sleep. But this medicine, it helped me, you know, not to wake up in the middle of the night, and I was able to get good sleep, and it helped me with my intrusive thoughts. And the paranoia and the anxiety have shrunk. I'm more functional, present, and productive in my daily life. Whereas before, the intrusive thoughts and the compulsive behaviors had literally taken over my life. Y'all saw all of the examples that I gave you on how it had taken over my life. But the medicine literally, I feel like it quieted my brain. And I feel like a human again. I feel like Kimberly again. And I feel so grateful. I feel so grateful for medicine, you know. Medicine that I initially didn't want to take, but I feel so grateful that my husband encouraged me to do that. And I feel so much better, you know. And I just want to say this, like, I refuse to let OCD win. You know, telling my story here on YouTube is another way of me feeling free because I no longer have to hide behind OCD. You know, I'm in front of it now. I'm taking my medicine and I'm feeling good, and anxiety is still there, but it's less. And, you know, when I have a moment, I can open up and be honest with my husband. I can open up and be honest with my best friend. I couldn't do that before because OCD likes to isolate you. It likes to, you know, if I could go back to what I was saying about my friends earlier, like, you know, there's some friends that I really, really miss. But because they didn't understand, and I didn't understand back then when I was in Kuwait that I had OCD, the friendship is damaged. Like, I can't go back and say, hey, I had OCD and that's why, I was, needing validation, and that's why I was unsure, and, all of the things, you know what I mean? But there are some friendships that I miss, and I feel bad that OCD broke those friendships up. And, sometimes I secretly ask God, like, if those friendships are supposed to come back around, let them come back around, because there were some great people, but I didn't know that I had a mental health issue. I didn't know, that the anxiety and all of that, had taken over, So I just, that's one of the things that I fight for now. Like, I thank God for an amazing best friend. My best friend was there with me, along with a couple of other good friends who were there with me throughout that time when I was going through. And they were constantly reminding me, you're not crazy. You're not alone. Not only are you not crazy and you're not alone, but this too is going to pass, Kimberly. This too is going to pass. It seems like, it's, long and hard, and it seems like you've been dealing with this, for half of your life, but it's going to pass, and we want you to know that we're here for you. We're holding space for you. And I want to say that too, like, when you have somebody in your life that's dealing with, mental health issues, try to hold space with them. And holding space is basically listening without judgment, just really listening, talking less and listening, and not making a person feel like they're crazy, or, but letting them know, like, I'm holding space with you. I want you to know that I'm holding space. And even if you don't know what to say in the moment, just your presence being there means so much, because I had one friend, she was so honest with me. She was like, listen, I don't know what to say to you, Kimberly. I don't know what to do for you, but I know that I love you deep. I love you deep, and I don't want to see you go through this. So I'm just going to come over your house every day, and I'm going to hold your hand. And if you want to laugh, if you want to talk about it, we'll talk about it. But I just want you to know that I love you. And, you helped me through some tough times, and I want to be there for you, And the last thing I want to say is that my husband is my hero. My husband is my hero, y'all. He's been my hero through this whole entire ordeal. He recognized that I needed help, and not just a talk therapist, but a psychiatrist that could give me medicine, and that medicine in return could help me manage and manage my life, and he knew that if I got that medicine, that we wouldn't get a divorce, because he would always tell me, Kim, you and I, we love each other. We're best friends. We don't fight. But whatever this is causing us to fight and be at odds, but we love each other. And so my husband, is my hero. He still to this day comes and hugs me when I'm having a moment. And he's truly my best friend, and the one that outside of God that I feel like knows me better than anybody. And I'm so grateful for him. I'm so grateful that he stayed, because he had every right to leave. He had every right to leave. Like, after all of the things that paranoia, those compulsive behaviors had me doing, he had every right to leave me and walk away. Because at this point, now I'm messing up his well-being and his mental health, But he stayed. And babe, I just want you to know that I love you so much, and I appreciate you so much. And I thank you for hanging in there with me and sticking in there with me and not giving up on me and not giving up on our marriage, and always telling me, like, you know, as your friend, you want to see me get better. You want to see me be well. And you always had my best interests at heart. And I want to say that I love you, and I'm still in love with you after 27 years. And I thank you so much. And you guys, that's my OCD journey.